Sugar. Funny thing happened just the other day. I was sitting by the kitchen window, just after the sun had started its slow slide down behind the sycamore trees, and all of a sudden, I caught a smell. Lord have mercy, it near knocked the wind right out of me. It was just a whiff, warm apples, a touch of cinnamon, a bit of that brown butter smell that clings to an old oven. And, just like that, I was gone. Back in my day, we didn't call it memory recall, or whatever you folks say now, no ma'am. It was just a feeling that snuck up on you. One minute I was sitting there, folding dish towels, and the next I was 16 again, barefoot in my mama's kitchen in Wilmore, Kentucky, staring down a dough ball that wouldn't roll out proper to save its life. 1961. That's when it happened. That's when everything changed. I didn't know it then, how could I? I was just a girl who wanted to learn how to bake something that didn't come out hard as a dog's chew toy. But now, looking back, I see it clear as day. That was the night I made my very first batch of hand pies. Little half-moons of apple and love. And child, it wasn't just about the pies. No, sir. Those little pastries. They were stitched into the fabric of something bigger. Something that's been sitting in my chest all these years like a thread that never got pulled. Every time I smell baked apples, it tugs on that thread. Real gentle, but firm, like it's saying, come on now, remember. I suppose I've kept this story to myself for a long while. Not because it's some big OL secret, though, Lord knows, there are parts one haven't told a soul. But more because, well, I didn't think anyone would understand. You young folks with your air fryers and TikToks, bless your hearts, you move so fast these days. I don't know how y'all even taste what you're eating. But this story, it ain't fast. It's slow, like dough rising on the windowsill. Like the way the light fades through gingham curtains in late July. You see, I didn't just learn how to bake that summer. I learned about loss, about womanhood, about what it means to hold on to something with both hands even when life is trying to snatch it clean away. And I learned what it means to remember. So today I thought, maybe I'll tell it. Maybe it's time. Maybe there's a reason that smell found me again after all these years. Maybe there's a reason you're listening. I want to tell y'all about that night in 1961. The way the crickets chirped outside, the old radio hummin' Patsy Cline real soft, and Mama's hands dusted in flour like she was part of the recipe herself. I want to tell you what happened, not just in the kitchen, but in my heart, because what started as a simple lesson in baking, well, honey, that was the night I became me. Now, you stay right there. Don't you dare click away. I'm about to tell you something you won't find in any cookbook. And by the time we get to the end of this story, I reckon you'll see why I've kept it close to the chest all these years. But before we go any further, let me ask you something. When's the last time a smell stopped you dead in your tracks and brought someone back to life? And if I close my eyes real tight, I can still see it all. Not just the house, but the feeling of it. The way the wooden screen door would slam shut no matter how gentle you tried to be. Mama used to say it was the house reminding us who was boss. We lived in a little white clapboard house just outside Wilmore, Kentucky. No bigger than a minute, but it held a whole world inside. There was a chipped yellow teapot on the stove, always whistling, and a braided rug by the sink that never laid flat on the corners. The kitchen smelled of Crisco and sweet tea and something, always cooking low and slow. That's just how it was. I must have been about 10 or 11 the first time I noticed the way sunlight hit Mama's hands when she was kneading dough. She had strong hands, not rough, but used. Worn like her apron, always smudged with flour, little bits of dough clinging to her fingers like they didn't want to let go. She'd hum to herself, never a full tune, just bits and pieces. Sometimes it was, "You Are My Sunshine." Other days it was church hymns, quiet and low, like she was talking to God while folding butter into biscuit dough. Daddy worked the rail lines, gone more than he was home. But when he did come through that door, we all knew it. His boots would thump against the porch boards, and he'd call out, "Smells like heaven in here, Betty." Mama would just smile, not looking up from whatever she had going on the stovetop. That was love, quiet, steady, no need for showing off. Just there. I was a quiet child, always watching, always listening. The kind of girl who'd rather sit on the floor and flip through the old Sears catalog than run around outside with the neighbor boys. I believed in good things, in happy endings and porch swings, and the power of pie to fix most problems. I thought kindness could carry you further than $1, and that if someone loved, they'd surely come back, eventually. That's just how I saw the world. Back then, we didn't have much. Didn't have a pot to pee in, as Daddy liked to joke, though Mama never found that one funny. But we made do with what we had. We reused tin foil till it nearly turned to dust, and we turned old dresses into aprons and curtains into quilts. It wasn't hardship to us, it was just life. That was the rhythm. Up at dawn, chores, a hot lunch if we were lucky, then more work till supper. And after dinner, Mama might bake, and if she did, Lord help us all, because nothing on this earth could keep us from that kitchen once the smell of warm fruit and sugar started drifting down the hall. It was around this time I started dreaming, not just silly girl dreams, neither. I'd lay in bed and picture myself with my own kitchen one day, maybe a husband who liked the smell of baked apples, maybe a daughter of my own I could teach to roll out dough just right. I wanted a life full of the little things, warm hands, slow mornings, pie on the sill, someone humming in the background. I didn't need riches. I wanted roots. I wanted something that felt like home, even when the world outside didn't. I used to think people were like recipes. Simple at first, then complicated once you got into the details. But if you treated them right, with patience and care, and just the right amount of sweetness, they'd rise up into something beautiful. That's what I believed. And maybe, in some small way, that's what I was trying to become. A girl with good hands and a good heart, just like Mama. Only I didn't know then that time has a way of talking things. That not all smells last forever. That people don't always come back. But oh, how I believe they did. It was a Saturday morning when I first saw him. I remember it real clear, 'cause it had just rained, the kind of rain that don't pour, but lingers, like the skies having second thoughts. The whole world smelled like wet earth and honeysuckle, and Mama had sent me down to the market with 57 cents and strict instructions not to come back with anything sweet. "We've got sugar at home," she said. But I wasn't thinking about sugar. Not then. Not yet. Wilmore wasn't the kind of town where new faces showed up often. So when I saw him, tall, gangly, wearing his sleeves rolled up and a pair of work gloves stuffed in his back pocket, well, I stopped right in the middle of the dusty road, like I forgot how feet worked. He was helping Mr. Mallory unload crates of peaches off the back of an old Ford flatbed. The peaches looked too pretty to be real, golden pink, fuzzed like baby cheeks. He moved like someone who knew how to carry things that mattered. Now, I wasn't the type to stare, no ma'am. But something about him. Lord have mercy. My heart thumped like a rabbit in a rain barrel. I didn't know what it was at the time, couldn't name it, would not have dared. But looking back, that was the first time I felt it. That funny flutter just beneath the ribs. I told myself it was nothing, just the heat, or maybe the smell of peaches. But deep down, I knew something had just cracked open. His name was Thomas Ray McKinley, from out near Harrodsburg. His folks had fallen on hard times, and he'd come to stay with his aunt and help out at the feed store for the summer. That was the whole story. Simple as a stick of butter on a warm skillet. But somehow, it changed everything. He saw me staring, eventually. gave me a crooked little smile, just one corner of his mouth, like he was holding back the rest. "You want one?" he asked, holding up a peach like it was an invitation. I didn't answer, just nodded and stepped forward, pretending not to notice how my hands were shaking. He handed me the fruit and our fingers brushed, just for a second. But it sent a jolt through me, clean down to my toes. I bit into that peach and I swear I've never tasted one like it since. Warm, dripping, almost too sweet. And standing there, juice running down my wrist, looking into the face of a boy I didn't even know, I felt something I hadn't before. Not just flutters or blushes. Curiosity. Wonder. Like maybe life wasn't just what Mama baked into the pie crust. Maybe there was something bigger. We talked a bit that day, not much, just enough to leave me buzzing all over. He said I had a serious look, like I was always thinking about something. Said he liked that. I didn't know what to say, so I just laughed and looked down at my shoes. I never had the right words back then. That evening, I couldn't focus on supper. Burned the beans, nearly knocked over the tea jug. Mama gave me a look, but didn't say much. Just wiped the counter and hummed softly and tenderly, like she always did when she sensed I had something simmering. And I did. I surely did. That night, laying in bed, I kept going over that moment, the peach, the smile, the feel of his hand against mine. I didn't know it then, but that boy would come to shape so much of who I became. Not because we married, we didn't. Life had other plans, as it tends to do. But because he showed me something I'd never seen before, that there was a whole world beyond my kitchen window. That sometimes, you don't need to understand a thing for it to change you. I didn't sleep much that night. And I didn't tell Mama. But the next morning, I asked her to teach me how to make peach hand pies. I told her it was just 'cause we had fruit to use up. But I'll tell you what, that was the first lie I ever told with a smile. It wasn't more than a few weeks after that peach morning that things started to shift. At first, it was little things. Mama got quieter, didn't hum as much. Daddy started leaving earlier for the rail yards, coming back with more creases on his brow than usual. But I was too caught up in my own daydreams to notice right away. My mind was on peaches, hand pies, and boys who smiled like secrets. I'd been begging Mama to let me try bikini on my own, and one Tuesday afternoon, she finally gave in. She handed me the bowl, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "All right then, let's see what you got." But before I could even crack an egg, the phone rang. Not many calls came to our house. Phones were for news, and more often than not, bad news at that. I'll never forget the way Mama's hand paused on the receiver like she already knew. The silence that followed was so still, even the air felt heavy. Then came the words that shook the floor beneath us. "Grandma Elsie's gone." Just like that. Mama didn't cry right away. She just sat down at the kitchen table and stared out the window like she was watching time unravel. Grandma Elsie was her mama, the one who taught her how to bake, how to sew, how to pray with your hands full of laundry. And now she was gone. The next morning, we packed up and headed out to Pulaski County for the funeral. I wore my Sunday dress and tried not to fidget, but something inside me felt unsettled. Not just about Grandma, but something deeper. The funeral was quiet, plain, just like Grandma would have wanted. But afterward, something shifted between me and Mama. Like there was a wall where the warmth used to be. She stopped calling me her little pie maker. Her voice got shorter, sharper. And I didn't know what to do with all the feelings that suddenly didn't have a home. Sorrow, yes, but also anger. I was mad she died. Mad at the silence in our house. Mad that peaches were still ripening on the trees when the woman who used to sing to Am was 6 feet in the ground. And then came Thomas. Or rather, he stopped coming. I waited every Saturday for that truck to roll down Main Street, but one day it just didn't. Mr. Mallory said Thomas had gone back home early. Family trouble, he muttered, loading sacks of feed without looking me in the eye. I didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. All I knew was the boy with the crooked smile was gone, and I didn't even get to say goodbye. I remember trying to make a batch of peach pies that week. Alone. I followed the steps just like Mama taught me, but the dough wouldn't come together. It crumbled in my hands like dry sand. I sat right down on the kitchen floor and cried, quiet at first, then harder. That was the first time I felt truly alone. I couldn't tell Mama what was hot and not then. I didn't have the words. She was too wrapped in her own sorrow, and I didn't want to seem selfish. But I was struggling with the grief, the silence, the ache of something unfinished. I'd lost a boy I barely knew, and a grandmother I thought would always be there. And I didn't know which pain was heavier. That was the summer the light changed in the house. Mornings felt dimmer. Even the sugar didn't taste as sweet. And somewhere inside me, a question started growing. What happens when the things that bring you joy also bring you pain? I didn't have the answer then. Still don't some days. But I knew I had to keep it keen. Not because I was ready, but because it was the only way I knew to keep their memory alive. And maybe to keep myself from disappearing, too. I remember that day like it stitched into my skin. The clock on the wall had just struck 4. That slow, hollow sound it made every hour. But when it struck this time, something inside me knew it wasn't just the hour changing. The whole house went still. The kind of stillness that don't come from peace, but from the breath right before a storm. Mama had been sitting in her chair by the window for near an hour, staring out like she was expecting someone, or something, though neither of us spoke much anymore. We'd been like two shadows passing in the kitchen, both of us carrying our own grief in silence. I'd started a pie that afternoon, peach, of course. Thought maybe if I baked something real good, it'd bring her back to me. Back to us. The way it used to be. I was rolling the dough and the phone rang. Now, you have to understand, phones didn't just ring in our house without reason. Not back then. Not unless it was bad news knocking on your door with its muddy boots. I stopped mid-roll, flour floating in the air like dust motes in sunlight. I watched Mama as she stood, slow, her fingers trembling just slightly. She picked up the receiver, said hello in that soft, guarded way of hers, and then she stopped talking. Not a word. Just listening. Then I saw it. Her knees buckled, and she reached out for the table like it was the only thing holding her to this earth. The receiver clattered to the floor, and that sound, Lord have mercy, that sound was worse than any scream. I ran to her, grabbed her shoulders, but she just looked at me with these eyes so wide and lost. It was like looking into a broken mirror. It was Daddy. There'd been an accident at the yards. One of the couplers slipped, they said. Quick, they said. No pain. Quick. No pain. They said it like that was supposed to help. But all I heard was the world going quiet. I remember how I sank to the kitchen floor, dough still on my hands, heart pounding like a freight train with no brakes. The smell of peaches hanging in the air, so sweet it turned my stomach. And I remember thinking he never even got a slice. That was the moment the clock stopped for me. I mean it real literal. The wall clock froze at 4:06. It ain't worked since. Daddy bought that clock for Mama when they got married, said it'd tick through all their days. And, just like that, it didn't tick no more. I couldn't cry right away. I just sat there, surrounded by flour and fruit, feeling like the whole house had caved in and I hadn't noticed, till now. I kept thinking about how I was gonna tell my little brother. How Mama was gonna sleep in that bed alone now. How the train he worked on was the one that took him away for good. Something inside me cracked that day like a pie crust left too long in the oven. I lost more than a father. I lost my steadiness, my sense of what comes next. And I knew in that raw, quiet space that nothing would ever taste the same again. But you know what? As I sat there, still on the kitchen floor, I looked up and saw the pie on the counter. Half made, abandoned, but still there. And in the strangest way, that unbaked pie felt like the only thread I had left to hold on to. It was Daddy who first said my hands were made for bikini. Said it like a blessing, not a joke. And in that moment, I knew if I let go of this, of what he saw in me, I'd be letting go of him too. That day broke me, yes. But it also carved a space in me, a deeper kind of strength I didn't know I had. It didn't come from holding it together. It came from standing back up, from picking up the dough again, even when your hands won't stop shaking. And Lord knows, they shook for a long, long time. You know, nobody tells you how quiet life gets after everything falls apart. Not right away, not when the phone rings or the hands shake or the neighbors bring over too much casserole. No, the real quiet comes later, when the dust settles and the clock on the wall still won't tick, and the only thing left moving is your breath in and out, slow and small like you're afraid to make a sound. That was how it was for me after Daddy passed. I'd sit at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring out the window, trying to understand how the world kept going when mine had just stopped. The house changed, Mama changed, I changed. There weren't no more singing in the kitchen, no more pies just 'cause the fruit was ripe. Mama didn't bake for weeks, after the funeral, maybe months. I'd hear her at night, her footsteps in the hallway, pittering like rain that didn't know where to fall. I wanted to ask her if she was all right, but we didn't know how to talk about the hole in the room. We both just tried to walk around it, like maybe if we didn't name it, it wouldn't be real. And me? I did what I could. Went to school, did my chores, kept the house running. But inside, I was different. Something in me had gone quiet. I didn't dream like I used to, didn't look out the window and imagine futures anymore. The world didn't feel big and full of possibility. It felt small, tired, like everything good had already been spent, and I was left with the scraps. I'd catch myself reaching for a second plate at supper, out of habit, and then remember. Or I'd smell smoke from the rail yard in the distance and have to sit down, just to keep from falling. And the worst part? I felt like I wasn't allowed to feel it too hard. Like I had to stay strong for Mama, for my little brother, for the rhythm of the house. But at night, when no one could hear, I'd cry into my pillow and ask God, why him? Why now? And I'll be honest with you, I stopped praying for a while. Not in the big, dramatic way you see in the movies. Just slow, fewer words, fewer thoughts. Like I couldn't figure out who I was talking to anymore. I didn't stop believing in God exactly. I just didn't know how to feel close to him in a world where Daddy's boots were still by the door, but he wasn't ever coming back. Even bikini felt different. I'd go through the motions, sometimes rolling dough, measuring sugar, but it didn't mean nothing. It was just something to do with my hands. The joy was gone. The love I used to fold into every crust had been replaced with silence. I'd look at the finished pies and feel nothing. Not pride, not hunger. Just a blank space where the warmth used to be. That's what grief does. It hollows you out. And it don't ask for permission. It just shows up, sits down next to you, and stays as long as it pleases. Folks think it fades, but I think it just changes its coat. Learns to blend in. You start carrying it like you do an old scar. Doesn't hurt the same, but it's always there when the light hits just right. So no, I wasn't the same girl who bit into that peach with stars in her eyes. That girl believed in sweetness without sorrow. That girl thought love was a recipe you could follow if you just measured things right. After Daddy died, I knew better. It's funny, how healing doesn't come all at once, like some big sunrise chasing away the dark. No, ma'am. It comes in pieces. Little ones. Quiet ones. The kind you don't even recognize until much later, when you're looking back and realize, oh, that's when the light started coming in again. For me, it started on a Tuesday afternoon in July. The kind of hot where the porch floorboards burn your bare feet and the lemonade melts faster than you can sip it. Mama had gone to visit her sister out in Somerset, and I was left to watch my little brother, Charlie. He was only 7 then, all elbows and cowlicks, always asking questions like he was trying to memorize the world before it changed again. He wandered into the kitchen while I was sweeping, and he stood there real quiet for a while, like he was studying me. Then he said, "Do you think if I make a pie, Daddy will smell it from heaven?" Land sakes alive, I thought my heart would fall clean out my chest. I didn't know what to say at first. My throat got tight, and my hands just kept working the broom like they hadn't heard a thing. But that question, it sat down beside me like an old friend. I looked at Charlie, his face smudged with dirt, eyes wide and waiting, and I realized he wasn't just a skin about Daddy. He was a skin if the world still made sense, if what we do here still matters. So I set down the broom. "Well," I said, kneeling next to him, "I reckon if we do it just right, he'll smell it clear across the clouds." And wouldn't you know it, that boy's whole face lit up like a lantern. We got to work right then and there. I pulled out the flour, handed him a spoon, and let him measure things even though half of it ended up on the counter and the rest on the floor. He peeled peaches with both hands and not a lick of grace, but I didn't mind. The kitchen was messy, but it was alive. He asked a million questions. Why do you use cold butter? What if we put chocolate chips in? How do you know when the dough's just right? And I answered everyone, even the silly ones, because I could feel something stirring inside me, soft but sure, like a match catching after too many strikes. When we finally slid that pie into the oven, Charlie sat down at the table, chin in his hands, and whispered, "I think Daddy would like this one." And I believed him. That night, after he went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen, watching the pie cool on the windowsill. The air smelled like peaches and butter and something else, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Warmth, not just from the oven, but from inside me. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the first time I'd felt like maybe, just maybe, I still had something to give. And I think that's when I realized pie wasn't just about sweetness or crust. It was about care, about reaching out when words fell short, about keeping love alive in the small, everyday ways. Maybe Daddy wouldn't taste it, but Charlie did, and that was enough. So I made a choice right then and there, barefoot in a flour-dusted kitchen, with the windows open and the crickets singing their night song. I chose to keep the keen, to teach, to pass it on. Not just the recipe, but the why behind it. And honey, that was the day I started coming back to life. There comes a time when the weight of all the years, all the grief, all the not yet healed things, just gets too much to carry. I'd been walking through that kitchen, that same old kitchen that had seen so many sunrises and so many tears, and I'd been wondering when the ache would stop. Wondering when I'd feel like I could breathe without feeling it pressing down on my chest. I don't think you ever fully forget loss. Not really. You just learn to live with it, like a scar that doesn't hurt, but you can still feel it when the wind blows the right way. But you can't let it define you. You can't let it be the thing that stops you from seeing what's still good in this life. So, one summer evening, the kind where the light hangs heavy in the air and the cicadas are singing their endless song, I stood in front of the window, looking out at the garden. The lilac bushes were overgrown, and the vegetable patch was all tangled up with weeds. It hadn't been tended to like it should have been, not since Daddy passed, and Mama wasn't able to do it. not with all the pain she carried in her bones. I had this thought now. It was more like a whisper that slid into my head like the first cool breeze of autumn. I hadn't planted a thing that year. I'd avoided it, honestly. Couldn't bring myself to touch the dirt. Like maybe if I did, I'd be digging something deeper than just a hole in the ground. But there I was, standing there, looking at that garden. And I realized I wasn't mad at the dirt. I wasn't mad at the weeds. I was mad at myself. I was mad at the way I'd let fear keep me from moving forward. I had let the past hold me like a vice, squeezing the life out of anything that could grow in me. I wasn't just mad at what had happened. I was mad that I'd let it stop me, and that's when I made my choice. I walked out to the garden, right through those overgrown weeds, and I stood there for a minute. Just took it all in. The smell of the earth, the hum of the evening, the steady pulse of life still happening, even when I felt like I had none left to give. Then I started pulling those weeds. One by one. My hands were rough, but they worked steady. I didn't care that the roots were tangled or the leaves were thick. I just kept going. And with each weed I yanked, I felt a little piece of that weight lift. It wasn't dramatic, no, but it was real. Like I was tucking back something I thought was lost. By the time the sun was low in the sky, I had cleared a small patch. It wasn't perfect. Nothing in that garden would ever be perfect. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was moving through my days just to get through them. I felt like I had a choice. That night, after supper, I took a deep breath, went into the kitchen, and pulled out a bowl. I made a pie, not for anyone else, but for me. For the first time in a long time, I made it because I wanted to. I made it because I could. And when it was done, I sat at the kitchen table and I ate a piece. Alone, but not lonely. I didn't need to wait for the past to heal before I could live again. I didn't need to make it perfect. I didn't need to wait for forgiveness or for time to fix things. I just needed to choose. I chose to keep going. I chose to take what I had, the mess, the memories, the broken pieces, and do something with it. I chose to live. And I think that's what I hadn't been able to admit to myself until then. That I had the power to move on. Not the past. Not the loss. Not the pain. Me. And in that quiet acceptance, I found peace. Not in the way I thought it had come. Not in some grand, heroic moment. But in the slow, steady act of letting go of what I couldn't change. Of choosing to be who I am, despite everything I've lost. That night, I made peace with the past. Not because I understood it all, but because I had to. I had to forgive myself for not being able to fix everything. For not being able to bring Daddy back or take away Mama's hurt. But I could still bake. And in that, I found a little piece of who I used to be. And I chose to hold on to that. You know, as the years have gone by, I've come to realize something about life. Something that I never could have seen back when I was just a girl, so busy dreaming of tomorrow that I didn't know how to live today. But here's the thing. You don't have to have all the answers to make it through. You don't have to know the ending of the story to begin. I used to think I'd be happy only when everything was perfect, when all the pieces fit just so, and the world stopped changing long enough for me to catch my breath. But life, sugar, life don't work like that. No, sir. It's messy. It's uncertain. Sometimes it's downright broken. But in all that brokenness, there's beauty. There's grace. And if you keep your eyes open, you might just see it. Look at this kitchen of mine. It's not fancy. Never has been. There's flour on the counter that I'll probably never get rid of. The sink's always got a dish or two that's just waiting for me to wash it. The oven? Well, it's older than dirt, and sometimes it makes noises like it's about to give up. But this kitchen, it's mine. It's where I learned how to make do. How to find something sweet even when the ingredients aren't perfect. How to bake a pie when the dough keeps falling apart. and how to keep going even when it feels like there's no one left to cheer you on. I used to think that the secret to a good pie was in the recipe, that if you got the measurements just right, everything would fall into place. But now I know it's more than that. It's about patience. It's about trust. Trust in yourself enough to let the dough rise, even when you're not sure it will. Trust in that the oven will do its job, even when it feels like it might not. And trust in that whatever comes out of it, whether it's a perfect golden crust or one that's a little too dark around the edges, it's still good. Because you made it. You showed up. You tried. You know, there's a lot of things I didn't get to learn the way I thought I would. I didn't get to learn how to live my life without loss, or how to make every dream come true, or how to keep the world from changing. But what I did learn through the heartache, through the quiet, through all the years of feeling lost and unsure, is that life isn't about waiting for things to be perfect. It's about doing what you can with what you have, even when it feels like you don't have enough. You see, the pies I make now, they don't need to be flawless. I don't need to impress anyone with them. I bake them because it's what I do. It's the way I've learned to take all the little pieces of life, the sweet, the sour, the broken, the whole, and turn them into something that feeds me. And if I'm lucky, feeds someone else too. That's the lesson. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to show up, keep your hands in the dough, and trust that even if it doesn't turn out just right, it's still worth the effort. And sometimes, the mess is where the magic happens. Maybe if you're out there, waiting for some sign to tell you it's time to move on, to let go, to start again, well, I'm here to tell you, you've already got everything you need to begin. The past doesn't own you unless you let it. What's ahead doesn't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes. You can start again. The only thing that truly matters is that you keep trying. You keep loving. You keep doing. And in the end, when you've baked all your pies, made all your choices, and lived through all your seasons of change, you'll realize the beauty was never in the perfect crust or the perfectly ripe fruit. It was always in the trying. It was always in the showing up. So don't wait for some perfect moment to begin. Start now, with what you have, right here, right where you are. Well, here we are. You've made it this far, and I reckon that's no small thing. You've heard about my pies, my losses, my silences. You've sat with me through those long nights of doubt and pain, and those little moments when something small sparked just enough hope to keep me going. And now, as the sun sets on this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with something. Not a lesson, per se. Not a big moral to tie it all up in a bow. But a question. A thought that's been sitting with me, just like the dust on my windowsill. It's something I've wondered about for years, and maybe, just maybe, you've wondered the same. You see, I've spent so much of my life looking back. I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I could get the past right, I'd feel whole again. But here's the truth I've learned, the one I had to bake in the oven of my own heart. You can't live in the past. You can only take what it's given you, learn from it, and keep going. So, when I look back on those days with Daddy, and those long afternoons when Thomas Ray McKinley passed through town like a summer breeze, I don't look for answers anymore. I don't try to fix what was lost. Instead, I ask myself, what's left now? And here's the thing, it's not just about me anymore. It's about you. It's about what you've lived, what you've lost, and what you've learned along the way. You see, we all carry something, don't we? A piece of the past we've tucked into the corners of our hearts, that we keep hidden in the kitchen drawers of our memories. Maybe it's a moment of joy. Maybe it's a grief that still lingers in the air when you walk into a room. Maybe it's a love you've lost or a dream that didn't come true. But my question for you, sweetheart, is this: what do you do with all of it? I think about that every time I bake. Every time I take a spoon and stir up a new batch of dough, I think what's left in me now that I've seen so much. And I tell you, what's left is this: the ability to make something beautiful out of the mess, out of the brokenness, out of the days that don't make sense. And you? What can you do with what's left of you? What's still in your hands, even after everything has changed? I think sometimes we wait too long. We wait for someone to come back, or for things to be fixed, or for the perfect moment. But honey, the perfect moment, it's never gonna come. You have to make it yourself. You have to bake it into your life, just like you'd need dough, gentle but steady. That's what I want you to take from this. Not the perfect pie, not the cleanest kitchen, but the act of moving forward. Sometimes I wonder if Thomas remembers me, if he ever looks back and thinks about that hot summer day, about the peach pie that never made it to the table, about the way the sun looked through the kitchen window. And sometimes I think, maybe he does. But even if he doesn't, even if he's forgotten about that day, I haven't forgotten. And that's enough. So I leave you with this, darling. What are you going to do with the pieces of you that are still here? I don't know about you, but I'm done waiting for something that may never come. I've got enough to work with. And I'll tell you what, I think that's the real magic of life. The way we can start over no matter how many times we've fallen. The way we can take what we've been given, all the joys and the heartbreaks, and create something that's ours. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for you to bake your own pie. So, I'll ask you one last time. What's left of you? Maybe it's time to stop waiting and start moving. And I think you'll find that when you do, the sweetness will come again. Not all at once, maybe, but in little bites. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll find a peach pie or two along the way.